Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'll be showing you my latest project, which involves making an AI, or a computer program that can play chess. Being a semi-professional player myself, this topic holds a special interest. So without further ado, let's jump straight in. Now, before we get started, we have to make an important decision, which is which programming language to use. This is quite relevant because certain languages will be much more suited to the computations required for a chess engine in terms of efficiency. I decided to use Python, probably one of the slower choices, because for one, I wasn't aiming for the most optimized engine, and for another, this is the language that I am most proficient in, so it was an easy choice. When building a chess engine, you need some representation of the board and pieces. Again, if you want your engine to be fast, you should probably just write the code for handling the board and moving the pieces yourself. But for me, I was more interested in the actual engine. Therefore, I found a useful library in Python called Python Chess that comes equipped with a board and pieces, as well as many other useful features like move generation and checking for a checkmate or a stalemate. Alright, let's begin. I started by writing code to set up the board with Python Chess, as well as a helper function to help generate and make a random move on the board. This will be the first level of my AI, an engine that simply generates all possible moves on the board each turn and chooses a random one to make. This didn't take too long, and soon we have our first engine versus engine game. Not the most interesting game. So how can we evaluate how good our current engine is? One thing we can do is to put the game into the analysis board of a website like lichess.org, and it can tell us the quality of the game. For reference, here's the analysis of a top-level Grandmaster game played recently in the Singlefield Cup. The number to look at here is the average cent-upon loss. The lower this number is, the better the quality the moves are. For this game, it happens to be 24 and 21, but for our game, it's absurdly high, as expected. Let's move on. Next, I decided to upgrade my random move selecting bot to prefer captures, because taking another chess piece is usually better than playing some random move. This, like the last stage, didn't take too long to code up. All I needed to do was to pick a random capture from the available ones, unless no capture existed, in which case we just revert back to choosing a random move. Let's play through a game that our level 2 AI played against itself. Again, not too impressive, but what about the cent-upon loss? Funnily enough, when I took a random game that the AI played and compared the cent-upon loss to the level 1, it was actually worse. I can see why though, as taking a random piece every move from both sides is naturally going to lead a lot of random blunders. But now let's turn things up a notch. We're going to implement a search algorithm called minimax to make our engine play much better. Let's briefly explain what minimax is. Before we go into the minimax algorithm, we're going to need a way to evaluate a chess position. That is, given a static position, how do we tell how good that position is without looking ahead any moves? The simplest way to do so is to give each piece a value and add up all of the values of the pieces in the position. Pawns are worth 1, bishops and knights are worth 3, rooks are worth 5, and queens are worth 9 points. If the piece is a black piece, then we give it the equivalent negative value instead. So for example, a black rook would add to the score total of -5. We don't need to assign the kings a value, because in every legal chess position, both kings will always be on the board, so they'll cancel each other out. As an example, let's take the following position. White has 5 pawns plus 3 minor pieces, which are all worth 3 points, adding up to a total of 14 points, while black has 3 pawns, which is 3 points, and a queen and a rook, which add up to 14 points. So that's 17 points for black. So the evaluation in this position would be 14 minus 17, which would be minus 3. Okay, so here we have a diagram that represents a chess position. So currently it's white's turn to move, so white is at node A, and white has 3 choices: b1, b2, and b3. Now, of course, white wants the evaluation of the position to be as high as possible. Therefore, white is the maximizing player at node A, and once we get to node b1, b2, and b3, it's black's turn to move. So black is known as the minimizing player, because black wants the score to be as low as possible, and therefore for node C, white is the maximizing player. So let's take a look at node C1 and first evaluate what the score is at that node. Now white is of course going to choose that node with value 5, and we write 5 in C1 because white is the maximizing player, and if white was in that position, white would choose the move leading to static evaluation 5. And here you see that we have the same thought process being used at node C2 and C3. So if white was on node C2, white would choose the move with outcome 11, and C3 would lead to outcome of 8. Now, if it was black's turn to move on node B1, black is the minimizing player. So black wants the move that's the lowest possible. So black would choose move C1 because that leads to a score of 5 given best play from both sides. And you can see that here I'm about to apply a similar process with all of the other trees, so node B2 and B3. We first look at the very bottom of the tree, look at all of the static evaluations, and we can work our way up the tree, taking first the maximizing player on nodes C4, C5, and C6, and then the minimizing player on node B2 because we want to work backwards. And at node B3, we use a similar approach. We have 3 for C7, 11 for C8, and 5 for C9. Therefore, B3 is going to be the minimum of nodes C7, C8, and C9, which is 3. And at the very top of the tree, we're again the maximizing player because it's white's turn to move. So white is going to choose that move with score 5. And therefore, the evaluation at node A is 5, because that's how we recursively manage to work out what that value is. Okay, now that we have an understanding of the minimax algorithm, let's implement it. It's a recursive algorithm that takes in 3 parameters: the board object, the depth, and the side to move in the position. The depth is a very important parameter, as it determines when the program will stop searching. A depth of 1 means that it searches 1 move into the future, which means it has to evaluate, on average, about 35 positions. The number of positions needed to be evaluated for a depth 2, therefore, would be somewhere around 35 to the power of 2, or 1,225 positions. This is a huge limiting factor of how far ahead we can get our engine to look in a given position. And this 35 number can also be described as the average branching factor in chess. Let's quickly take a look at the game of tic-tac-toe. The max number of moves a player can have is 9, which is on the first move, and the minimum is 1. So not only does the branching factor start at a much smaller number, it shrinks every move, meaning a program would be able to brute force and solve the whole game quite easily. Coming back to chess, let's say we want our engine to look ahead 6 moves. That would be roughly 35 to the power of 6, or 1.8 billion positions to evaluate, according to the average branching factor. There are many techniques to combat this limiting factor, but we'll come back to that in a bit. It looks like we finished programming our Minimax AI. Now for the moment of truth. Let's see how it performs. We need to give it a high enough depth so that it can think for a few seconds and pick good moves, but not too high so that it doesn't take minutes of thinking just to play a single move. For me, a depth of 3 seemed to hit the sweet spot. Let's take a look at the AI game. As you can see, the quality of the moves, while still not super high, has still improved drastically. One really interesting moment is right here, where black plays knight to f5, trapping their own queen in the center, but threatening to take the rook on a3 with the bishop. White retreats to a1, and then black makes the game-losing blunder with rook to g7. White finds the correct response, knight to f2, trapping and winning the queen. Note that this was not possible a move earlier, as black would have been able to take the knight on b1 with their queen. After this sequence, the result of the game was never in question. Let's take a look at the average center-pawn loss. Not bad at all. While there are still many mistakes being made, 50 and 70 are much better than 400 or 500. But we can do even better than this. Let's move on to our last level. To further improve our minimax algorithm, we can apply a technique called alpha-beta pruning to it. Here's an explanation of how it makes minimax much faster. Now we come back to this familiar minimax diagram from before. Let's start as usual by looking at node C1, looking through each of the leaves, and choosing the branch with the maximum value as usual, so 5. And now we go back and we look at node B1, where it is the minimizing player's turn to move, or black to move. Black would like the evaluation to be as low as possible, and note that black has the option of choosing C1, which would lead to evaluation 5. Now looking at node C2, all we actually have to do is look at the first leaf, or the 6, to reject the whole node C2. And that is because that if black makes the move C2, white would, at the very least, have the move leading to static evaluation 6, which is already better than the 5, which we don't want as the black player. So we don't have to look at this branch anymore. And we can apply a similar strategy to eliminate the leaves of node C3. So we look at this 8 and we say, well, we don't really want to give white the option of getting static evaluation 8 when we can already go to node C1, and at the very best, white can get a position with static evaluation 5. So we can actually just stop there, stop early, and prune that branch too. Now we can write the value 5 in the node B1, because we have successfully rejected the nodes C2 and C3 from consideration. Now going back to node A, it is now the maximizing or white's turn to move. So keep in mind that white will always have the opportunity to get a static evaluation of 5. Now looking at node C4 as usual, we take the maximum of 3, 2 and 4, which is going to be 4. So we can safely place that in C4 as the maximizing player to move. Now let's take a look at node B2, because this is really important. It is now the minimizing player's turn to move, or black to move, and black has the option of getting a static evaluation of 4. Now knowing this, we can immediately prune the whole branch, because white would never in the right mind play the move B2, which would allow black to get static evaluation of 4, if white can just make the move B1, which gets a static evaluation of 5 guaranteed. This is the power of alpha-beta pruning. We can eliminate many branches and never have to evaluate them, saving on precious time. Alright, let's get into the implementation. I mostly just reuse my code from the minimax function, but we need to add 2 parameters, alpha and beta, which keep track of the best possible outcome for white and black at each node. These parameters will be passed down with each recursive call to the alpha-beta function. Another optimization to alpha-beta pruning we can make is move ordering. Alpha-beta works the best when we check the best moves first, as once we have found a very good move for white, many variations for black can be completely disregarded, as the logic is that white will never go down that path anyways. For move ordering, I simply took all of the captures of a position and ranked them first, as they are more likely to be better moves than the non-captures. Then all of the other moves went behind them. It's a very basic strategy, but was a good place to start and see how the model gets on. With alpha beta, we are able to do one depth deeper than the last iteration, depth 4. It managed to play a marathon game at exactly 200 moves, although the game was basically a draw by move 90. There were still many mistakes, and the center-pawn loss was 91 and 90, higher than our game with depth 3 above. I'm not too surprised by this though. as with a much longer chess game, you also have much more room for error, raising the average cent-to-pawn loss. There's actually one last thing I did to improve my chess program. Here's the dilemma. Even if we search at depth 4 or 5 or whatever arbitrary depth, what if just one move after the position we saw, the opponent can take our queen? This could drastically swing the evaluation back into their favor, and we've basically failed very badly at choosing a good move because we missed something far down. This is known as the horizon issue. How can we solve it? The answer is with a technique called quiescence search. The idea is that at the end of our alpha-beta search, at say depth 4, we do a further recursive search from each of the leaves of our branch. But this time, we only look at impactful moves, like captures and checkmates, until no more exist. As an example, take this position. Let's say that this is the position our AI sees after looking 4 moves deep. Now we do a quiescence search. There are 4 captures in this position, so we only look at those, as they are likely to have a dramatic effect on the evaluation. And after each of those captures, we look at all the captures available for black, and so on. This will help mitigate the horizon issue. Note that we continue to use alpha-beta pruning even throughout the quiescence search. Here's me writing the code for the quiescence search. It's mostly the stuff we've seen before. The only difference to the alpha-beta function is that we continue searching until we hit a quiet position, or game over. Therefore, there is no depth. We also modify our move generation function so that we have an option to return only the captures in a given position. So, the big question is, how does quiescence perform in practice? I tried simulating alpha-beta and a quiescent game, and the results were quite disappointing, really. Even with a really low depth for the alpha-beta, the quiescent part of the search was taking a long time. To help me debug this issue, I used a module called cProfile to identify the bottleneck. Here's the result. Don't worry if it looks confusing. There's only a few parts we need to focus on. We can see here that the program took roughly 210 seconds to complete before I interrupted it. It also took cumulatively 210 seconds to run the alpha-beta search function, which makes sense, since our program should be spending all of its time searching, and pretty much no time doing the other trivial stuff like printing the board. What's of more interest here is that my move order sort function took 116 seconds of the 210 seconds of the program, which is more than half. If you recall, this function was in charge of generating the legal moves in the position, ordering them captures first, and then returning either the full list or just the captures in the case of quiescence search. It looks like having to generate so many moves across so many branches of our tree is really taking a toll on runtime. You can see here that generate pseudo-legal moves was called 17 million times, taking a cumulative 53 seconds. So unfortunately, it looks like we run into a bottleneck, which might be tricky to overcome, since the problem here is with the Python chess module itself. One idea I have is to save the legal moves that we generate in each position via a hash table, but it's probably way too slow in terms of memory. Probably worth a shot though. For now, I think I'm going to wrap up things here. I've really only scratched the surface in terms of engine optimization and algorithms, but I'm happy with the progress I've made. If you want to explore more, I'd check out some of the following terms: iterative deepening, opening books, endgame table bases, Zobrist hashing, principal variation search, and null move pruning. In the future, I might explore some of these ideas in more detail to further improve my AI. And who knows, maybe I'll do another video on these topics. I'll also send a link to a very helpful article that guided me to write this bot. I'll also link the GitHub repository in the video description below. Finally, I'd like to thank all of you for watching through to the end. It really means a lot. Be sure to like and subscribe to follow me in my various projects, and comment what you think about my chess AI down below. That's all for today. See you again soon.